Okay, I want to welcome everybody to the APC Speakers Series. Today we are very fortunate to have a very special guest with us today, Congressman Conor Lamb from the 17th Congressional District out in the Pittsburgh area. First of all, I want to thank our sponsors for today's event, Cleveland Brothers and Penn Stress, our platinum sponsors, and then of course our gold partners as well, Bremen Construction, Equipment Corporation of America, Golden Triangle Construction, International Construction Equipment, and of course, New Enterprise Stone and Lime Company. And we thank all of those firms for their support this year and over the years. It's very helpful to us. It allows us to bring these programs like our speaker series here today with Congressman Lamb to you. Now, we've been focusing a lot lately here at APC and on all of our weekly updates. We've been hitting you pretty hard about lobbying for some money in the state budget, talking about the importance of maybe separating the motor license fund and some of the funding for the state police out of there. But it's important for us to keep in mind that there's a lot of activity going on just about 100 miles south of here in Washington. And again, we're very, very blessed to have Congressman Conor Lamb with us today. Congressman Lamb represents Pennsylvania's 17th Congressional District, which includes parts of Allegheny County and Butler County, as well as Beaver County, of course, in southwestern Pennsylvania. Mr. Lamb previously served as Assistant U.S. Attorney in the Justice Department's Pittsburgh office. He was an active duty U.S. Marine from 2009 to 2013, serving as Major in the U.S. Marine Corps. With that, Congressman, you're a member of the House Infrastructure Committee. You're no stranger to this issue. As one of the up-and-comers in Congress, obviously with close ties to our industry, and also our issue of transportation funding. So welcome and thank you for being here today. I'm going to jump right into it with and let you talk about some legislation that you recently introduced that I think shows a tremendous recognition of the situation with departments of transportation around the country, particularly PennDOT, and some of the issues, some of the problems, I guess, if you will, that they've been experiencing over the last year and through COVID. And the acronym for that is the PAVE Act, but it will also, the gist of it is to help struggling DOTs with projects that are maybe on hold or having some problems going forward. So tell us a little bit about that so our folks who are attending can know what you're doing there.
Sure, and thank you all for having me and giving me a chance to speak. The PAVE Act really started for me one morning when I opened the Pittsburgh newspaper and saw that PennDOT was, I guess, postponing or canceling, I think it was 6 different projects in my district, my congressional district alone, that were road and bridge that were ready to go. They were like, you know, obviously designed, permitted, contracted, all this. I know there's a lot of work that goes into that on the front end. But the money didn't come through from the gas tax revenue and for a couple other reasons during the pandemic. And so they would have to stop them. And I thought to myself, boy, I hope those workers have another project that they get to go to, or else, you know, that's making unemployment worse. And what a missed opportunity. I mean, with fewer people on the roads during the pandemic, people that needed to be working, outdoor work being pretty good as far as COVID goes, it's just a missed opportunity not to be getting as much done as we possibly can. And so we started working on trying to send federal money directly to the state departments of transportation. And I wanted to do that for the reasons I mentioned, but I also just wanted to make sure we kind of stayed on the ball in Washington, that as we start having this much larger discussion about infrastructure and everything we need to do and all the futuristic kind of pro-climate stuff we want to do, I also wanted to make sure we just built some roads quickly, like so that people could see we were serious about doing practical things. And it seemed like sending money to the state departments of transportation was going to be the fastest way to stop projects from getting canceled and make sure they get done, and also allow them to get ahead on some of the things that they want to do in the future too. So we did get a good amount of money in the COVID legislation at the end of 2020. That was like a 900-some billion piece of legislation. I think that sent around 10 billion or so to the states. And we worked with them to find out how much more need there was, and that number came in around 18 billion. So the PAVE Act would basically just transfer that 18 billion from the federal government to those state departments of transportation, all of them according to a formula, so that they would basically just be able to keep the work going.
So that would work along the existing formula that's currently in the what was known as the FAST Act, or the current Authorization Act. Had you had any contact with PennDOT looking at either projects that might be able to move forward with this legislation, or any idea how much Pennsylvania would receive from this? Obviously, that the 18 billion, of course, is nationwide with all the state DOTs.
Yeah, you know what? We had the number. In fact, the Post Gazette printed that. So if one of my staff members is on here, they could probably put it in the chat. It was a nice. I want to say it was like 400 or 500 million or something like that. It was a nice number, and would basically keep the existing work going. And PennDOT was active in helping us identify the need and justify it and all that kind of thing. So they've been great. And, the nice thing about this issue is Democrats and Republicans both have had happen to them in their district what I described happening in mine. So we have a lot of Democrats and Republicans on board. It's very bipartisan, could easily pass the Senate as well. So as other things get caught up in Washington politics, this is one that we think could really sail through and make a quick, decisive impact.
So what's the status of the legislation right now? Is it tied to the next year's budget, or is it going to be standalone, or how is that anticipated to work?
We introduced it as standalone. I think it was last week or the week before, and are gathering co-sponsors on both sides. With the goal, really, it seems like if you do that, it can help. 720 million. Even better. If you do that, it can help the potential of this bill getting kind of sucked up into the larger infrastructure package at some point. So I don't know if we'll get it to the House floor as a standalone, but I think in the committee phase, when we're doing the initial drafting, showing all that bipartisan support is going to help us get it in whatever ends up moving.
Well, it certainly would be helpful. As you probably know, PennDOT, when we passed comprehensive transportation funding bill here a number of years ago, we were doing contract values, I guess, if you will, total contract values on an annual basis for PennDOT statewide at about $2.5 billion for a number of years. Last year, we dipped to 1.6, kind of made a little bit of a comeback at 1.9, but what we're trying to do is move that needle back up more closer to that 2.5 level and rising, which gets us, towards the $3 billion level, which is probably a good level that the industry can deliver. The department can work with utilities on utility relocation, design work, and that sort of thing. So anything, if your legislation would pass, would be extremely positive as we try to do things here at the state level. So anything that we can do to support you with that, we'd certainly love to know about it.
Oh, that's great. Well, definitely everyone can contact their member of Congress and encourage them to sign on as a co-sponsor of the PAVE Act. And again, that really helps just kind of get it into this larger piece, whatever it is that ends up passing. So.
Okay, so we already have some homework. That sounds great. We'll be happy to do that for you. I just want to let everybody who's watching remind you that you can ask questions of Congressman Lamb by using the Q&A feature in the control bar. Of course, the chat function is live as well, as we've already seen, but you can get involved here as well if you want. So let's pivot on. You mentioned the larger infrastructure package. How do you see the infrastructure plan that's now being kind of negotiated, I guess, if you will? The president put in a huge plan. The Republicans have come back from another thing. How do you see that kind of playing into the reauthorization for this year?
I think this is the typical legislative bargaining that happens. My guess is the House and the Senate will pass very, very different versions of an infrastructure bill and surface transportation reauthorization. I think the House version will probably look a lot like what we passed last summer, which included the surface reauthorization, but also went pretty far beyond it. That sounds like the Senate has a smaller price tag in mind and a much narrower scope. And we really need the White House to help broker the distance between those two things. There are some in the Democratic Party who think, oh, forget it, we can't negotiate, let's just do everything by budget reconciliation. Well, you can't do everything by budget reconciliation. There's just certain policy things that you have to be able to actually write into law and pass in a normal lawmaking fashion. And I think we owe it to the public to show them we're trying to do something bipartisan here too. So I'm optimistic. It's just gonna, like all these things always do, it's gonna take several rounds, I think, of back and forth.
Yeah, so the time frame for this usually, the federal budget is an October 1 occurrence. So we're probably looking at, activity throughout the summertime and maybe narrowing the discussions down sometime in September, obviously after Labor Day, and even maybe closer to that October 1 time frame. Does that meet with your thinking, or are we going to look at something maybe sooner?
I think you're going to see legislative, drafts and maybe even some initial versions pass the House and the Senate sooner than that. But yeah, in terms of when we could really have something on Biden's desk, I think that sounds like a reasonable estimate. Again, I think a lot depends on how much the Senate Republicans show that they want to negotiate. I think the president has been pretty clear that he's interested in negotiating. He's having them over the White House. He already brought his number down the other day in public. I think he's doing what it takes to show good faith and an interest in actually doing this. And I would say that if at each sort of month that passes along the way, if he's seeing the reciprocation from the other side, I think it will continue and we'll be on that road. But if he's not, I think we'll get to a point where the Democrats in Congress will probably just decide to do their own thing. So I don't know where we cross over that threshold.
Yeah, I don't know whether it was over the weekend or at the end of last week, but the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee put out a bill, $303 billion reauthorization act. They're touting it as bipartisan with involvement by senators on both sides of the aisle. It appears as though there's some funding in there for highways and public transit and other modes. There are some of the social issues that I think that particularly on the House side that some people were interested in. I guess looking at the impact of some roads in urban areas over the years and whether they have a disproportionate negative impact on some communities. I think they've got some of that in there. Interestingly enough, there is also, I guess, a pilot program of some sort on vehicle miles traveled, and so I guess I'd like to hear what you think about what's the possibility that we're going to be looking at moving away from the consumption-based gasoline tax in the near, or is this a longer term basis? And I'm gonna couch that by saying I've heard VMT is something that's coming, but it's 5 years from now, and I've been hearing that for about 20 years. So I don't know. I'm just curious as to what you think about all that.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if something regarding it made it into the the final package, but I think it would be much more in the style of an incentive or pilot project for local initiatives, which makes sense to me just because I think academically the vehicle miles traveled idea seems to have a lot of support from different types of people because it just seems fair. Like the miles that you're using the road is how much you should pay for the road. But with the technical challenges that there are, as far as how you track that, is it part of an annual vehicle inspection? Is there technology in your car, privacy concerns, all that? That seems to me like the exact type of thing that should be experimented with on a local level before, there's kind of a one size fits all federal solution. So I think the most that you would see would be a pilot of some kind. And in fact, in the bipartisan problem solvers caucus that I'm a part of, we released an infrastructure report trying to define what we view as the scope of, the term infrastructure. And we had support for vehicle miles traveled pilot programs in there. So that represents 29 Democrats and 29 Republicans in the House. There's clearly support for it on both sides.
Let me probe you a little bit on that. The definition of infrastructure. What did the Problem Solvers Caucus? Maybe you can kind of give us some of the parameters of what you looked at as far as including within the term infrastructure. That's obviously, anybody watching the news lately, that's a big controversy or a debate, I guess, if you will, over just how far do we expand the definition of infrastructure. What's the bipartisan Problem Solvers group? How do they define infrastructure?
Sure. And I saw while you were asking that question, somebody asked about who would collect the fees for a vehicle miles traveled, and that's the exact kind of question that I think the local entities need to decide. So I think we would do is probably support different approaches. And I know Governor Wolf has this office that he's set up to try to explore exactly those kind of questions. So we would probably let states try that a few different ways and kind of see what works. As far as the scope of infrastructure, our report kind of found itself in between what you might consider the kind of polar ends of this debate. There were Senate Republicans who basically wanted to just reauthorize the existing road and bridge projects and not do programs and not do a whole lot more. Then obviously there was President Biden's some $4 trillion proposal with very far-reaching, and ours embraced mostly the classical physical definition of infrastructure, so surface, water, but we also had in there, for example, the energy grid and electric vehicle charging stations. So we kind of and we had rural broadband. We had a pretty healthy investment in rural broadband. So we went a little further than I think the Senate Republicans did. We didn't really put a price tag on that, but what we were saying was we think there's bipartisan agreement to do our traditional infrastructure funding, and then also do these two critically important things, which is try to prepare the electrical grid for the challenges that we know climate change is bringing us, and make sure every American has access to internet that actually works. I think in the information age, that's a basic requirement of success in business and education and all these things we're trying to do.
Yeah, certainly in the past year, we've seen the importance of internet connection, particularly for school students, both primary, secondary education. It's very, very important. So that would be obviously a winner in most people's minds. I would tend to agree. So let me back up a little bit as we move towards a reauthorization bill. Interestingly enough, again, I'm going to go back to the Senate bill that has been introduced, and they talked about various and sundry ways. And of course, it's important for everybody to remember that the Environment and Public Works Committee, and I guess the Infrastructure Committee on the House side, they develop plans on how a program could be used or the spending. But there are other committees then that have to actually come up with the pay fors. So we're going to need, as we develop out VMT, which is still going to take some time, obviously. If we're to boost the authorization bill or move the FAST Act up in terms of spending availability, we have to look at pay fors. Is there any insight or any ideas that people have been talking about? Again, since 1994, we haven't increased the gas tax, and I think since 2004, I've been told don't ever expect that to ever happen again. So I guess my question is, is there thought of additional pay fors?
I think what the president has proposed is basically a menu of options that the law writers in Congress may choose from, and I don't think you're going to see everything that President Biden proposed as changes to the tax code, but I think you might see some of them. So the corporate rate, for example, the broadly applicable corporate rate. I'm told that when they negotiated this in 2017, the business community really only was asking for it to go down to 25%, and Trump took it down to 21 as kind of a show of force, I guess, from his perspective. So it doesn't seem like there's a ton of opposition to adjusting that to 25, and it would still be a lot lower than it's been for most of American history. So that's one that I wouldn't be shocked if it makes it through. There is an issue that our bipartisan problem solvers really take an interest in, which is just improving tax enforcement and closing what they call the tax gap. So Larry Summers and others, pretty prominent academics, have studied this, and they say that without changing a single tax law from where it is right now, but by just investing more in the IRS, both in terms of people that they can hire to do audits, but then also better technology, using AI to look at large data sets and improving a little bit what banks in particular, have to report, that you could collect over $1 trillion in the next decade. So there's a little bit of debate about what the size of that is, if it's really $1 trillion, but we think it's pretty promising. So if you make some tax changes, you do better tax enforcement, and then obviously Biden has proposed a bunch of other things as well, you're starting to get in the $1 trillion range. And then you have to ask, how much of it, do we have to pay for every cent? If you think of infrastructure like an investment, as I do, most businesses obviously finance their big capital investments, and that would be the government doing this as well. So I think you might end up with a mix of debt financing and some of these revenue raisers.
There's been a call lately for, I guess, a national infrastructure bank. I think we have something along that line already. Is that topic, kind of bubbling to the surface, or not?
It is, yeah. I mean, there's some pretty different viewpoints on how a bank like that would be structured, but there's a lot of people on both sides encouraging it. I like it for kind of a simple reason, which is that I guess two reasons. One is if we're gonna raise taxes on anybody, even the wealthy, even the powerful, I think it's good if we can make very clear to them that we are doing this for a specific purpose, which is to invest in the infrastructure that benefits our entire economy and entire community. That we're not doing it to punish them, for example, but there's certain investments we have to make as a country. These things are pay now or pay later. If we don't fix the bridge, it will collapse, like the locks and dams in my district will collapse. So we have to do this. So I think if we make some tax changes, a national infrastructure bank would allow us to basically assign the money there and help it be really clear to people that that's what we're using it for. I also think that on an ongoing basis, a bank could help us not just get caught up on all the infrastructure needs that we have to fix, but also stay caught up and stay competitive, so we don't slide back to 15th in the world or whatever we are now. And it could be overseen by non-political people, by engineers, by people who really know this subject matter, almost like the Fed is for monetary policy, but for infrastructure. So I think those are two big advantages. If we could use this as an occasion to get it done, I would love that. We'll see if it makes it into the House bill, I guess.
Okay. We have one person on the line who's called in. You want to go ahead and unmute them? George Wolf, who you might know, Congressman, I guess has a couple words. George is also the chairman of our Keystone Transportation Funding Coalition, which has, I know, done some outreach to you in the past. George, unmuted.
Congressman, I just want to thank you for your deep interest in transportation. You're so much like your grandfather was, who was a leader in the state Senate and was one of the founders of getting the PAT organization put together in Pittsburgh, was terribly interested in every form of transportation, and a very dear friend. Thank you so much.
Thanks, George. I appreciate it. Yeah, I got really interested in this stuff when I heard a story like that when I first got to Congress. I went to meet with the Port of Pittsburgh Commission, and I guess my grandfather had chaired it one year in the early 90s, and they were just then authorizing the Lower Mon project to rebuild the locks and dams, I think between Elizabeth and the city of Pittsburgh, basically. And he had some line about how we have to do this. I really want my grandchildren to enjoy the benefits of all of this. And that project was so underfunded, it took so long to get done, that it was actually just being finished as I came into Congress. So little did he know his grandchildren would enjoy seeing it completed, not 30 some years later, which is just a ridiculous way to do infrastructure projects. So I hope we can speed these things up going forward.
Well, I remember when we were talking about Act 89, which was a comprehensive system-wide transportation bill, and we would talk about ports in Pennsylvania. Of course, everybody thinks about Philadelphia and maybe a little bit about Erie, but we would remind them about the locks and dam system and the rivers in Pittsburgh, and it's just as vitally important as other ports. So yeah, that's a great legacy to have. So I'm going to wrap up here. We want to thank you, Congressman, for spending a half hour with us today. A very, very informative conversation, and I always like to leave these things with a charge, and we have one now, and that is to support Congressman Lamb in his efforts on the PAVE Act. Obviously, that additional money could be very helpful, not just to Pennsylvania, but across the country, and could be a short-term boost while we look at reauthorization and other infrastructure programs going forward. So I'm going to give you the last word, Congressman, if you have anything you'd like to leave us with before we wrap up here today.
No, I appreciate the work and the lobbying work in particular that you all do. And I know last year was not an easy year for any business in America practically, and I'm sure not yours. So I know we have a lot of work to do to get us caught up. I also think it's time to go big on this thing. That the existing funding levels and existing programs, they've gotten us where we are, which is whether you call it D+ or C- or 15th in the world or whatever we are. I mean, we just have to do a lot more, I think, to get caught up. And I think there's a mix of factors right now where people need jobs, and the government is borrowing pretty cheap. And it's time to act for just a whole lot of reasons. That this is really a great moment of opportunity. I think of it in generational terms. I think that 2 or 3 generations back, they made some critical investments from the 1930s to the 1950s that made America what it is in a lot of ways. And I don't want to pass the buck anymore. I think we should take it on ourselves to do something like that for the generations that follow. So I know you guys are all part of that. Please stay in touch with my office and let us know how we can really help and make a difference. And it's great seeing you today.
Will do. Thank you again. Go big or go home. I like it. Thanks again, Congressman Conor Lamb, for being with us today, and thank everybody here for attending today. Just want to mention that we've received word from Deputy Secretary Mike Kaiser that he will be joining us here in the near future for one of our Speaker Series meetings. So there's a little teaser. Look out for dates to be coming up here soon for our next Speaker Series, which will be PennDOT Deputy Secretary Mike Kaiser. Again, we want to thank Congressman Conor Lamb for a great half hour and good conversation. A lot of great information, and thank everybody for participating today. We'll see you Wednesday at 1 o'clock for the APC weekly update.